Alexander Grigoryevich Lukashenko or Ryhoravich Lukashenka, born August 30, 1954, is a Belarusian politician who has been the first and only president of Belarus since the establishment of the office on July 20, 1994, making him the longest-sitting European president. Before his political career, Lukashenko worked as director of a state farm, and served in the Soviet border troops and in the Soviet army. Lukashenko continued state ownership of key industries in Belarus after the dissolution of the Soviet Union and retained important Soviet-era symbolism, which can be seen in the coat of arms and national flag of Belarus, adopted following a controversial 1995 referendum, which were based on those of the Belarusian SSR. Following the same referendum, Lukashenko was given more power with the ability to dismiss the Supreme Soviet of Belarus, and another referendum in 1996 allowed Lukashenko to further consolidate power. The Russian language was also given the same status as Belarusian, and economic ties with Russia were strengthened, which furthermore led to the creation of the Union State with Russia, which allows Belarusians to freely travel to, work, and study in Russia, and vice versa. However, relations with Russia have not always run smoothly under his tenure, such as during the Milk War. Lukashenko heads an authoritarian government and has referred to himself as the last dictator in Europe. Elections are not considered to be free and fair by international monitors, opponents of the regime are repressed, and the media is not free, leading to sanctions on Lukashenko and other Belarusian officials being imposed. His disputed victory in the country's 2020 presidential election led to widespread allegations of vote rigging, which strongly amplified anti-government protests, the largest during his rule. Following the contested election, Lukashenko is not recognized by the United Kingdom, the European Union, or the United States as the legitimate president of Belarus. Early life, family, and education. Lukashenko was born on August 30, 1954 in the settlement of Kopys in the Vitebsk Oblast of the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. Starting with an interview given in 2009, Lukashenko has said that his actual birthday is August 31, the same as his son's Nikolai's. This caused some confusion as all official sources had said August 30, 1954 up until then. An explanation was later given that his mother had entered the hospital on the August 30 in labor but not given birth until after midnight. His maternal grandfather, Trochim Ivanovich Lukashenko, had been born in the Sumy Oblast of Ukraine near Shostka. Lukashenko grew up without a father in his childhood, leading him to be taunted by his schoolmates for having an unmarried mother. Due to this, the origin of his patronymic Grigoryevich is unknown, and there are various rumors about who Lukashenko's father might have been, with the most popular version being that he was a Roma passing through the region. His mother, Ekaterina Trofimovna Lukashenko, gave birth to another son, Alexander's older brother, who died. Ekaterina worked unskilled jobs on a railway, at a construction site, at a flax factory in Orsha, and finally as a milkmaid in Alexandria, a small village in the east of Belarus, close to the Russian border. Lukashenko went to Alexandria Secondary School. He graduated from the Mogilev Pedagogical Institute in 1975, after 4 years studying there, and the Belarusian Agricultural Academy in Horky in 1985. Military and early politics career. He served in the Soviet border troops from 1975 to 1977, where he was an instructor of the political department of Military Unit No. 2187 of the Western Frontier District in Brest, and in the Soviet Army from 1980 to 1982. In addition, he led an all-Union Leninist Young Communist League chapter in Mogilev from 1977 to 1978. While in the Soviet Army, Lukashenko was a deputy political officer of the 120th Guards Motor Rifle Division, which was based in Minsk. In 1979, he joined the ranks of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of Belarus. After leaving the military, he became the deputy chairman of a collective farm in 1982, and in 1985, he was promoted to the post of director of the Gorodets State Farm and Construction Materials Plant in the Shkla district. In 1987, he was appointed as the director of the Gorodets State Farm in Shkla district, and in early 1988, was one of the first in Mogilev region to introduce a leasing contract to a state farm. In 1990, Lukashenko was elected deputy to the Supreme Soviet of the Belarusian SSR. Having acquired a reputation as an eloquent opponent of corruption, Lukashenko was elected in April 1993 to serve as the interim chairman of the Anti-Corruption Committee of the Belarusian Parliament. In late 1993 he accused 70 senior government officials, including the Supreme Soviet Chairman Stanislav Shushkevich and Prime Minister Vyacheslav Kabish, of corruption, including stealing state funds for personal purposes. While the charges ultimately proved to be without merit, Shushkevich resigned his chairmanship due to the embarrassment of this series of events and losing a vote of no confidence. He served in that position until July 1994. Presidency. First term. A new Belarusian constitution enacted in early 1994 paved the way for the first democratic presidential election on June 23 and July 10. 6 candidates stood in the first round, including Lukashenko, who campaigned as an independent on a populist platform. In an interview with the New York Times, he declared, "I am neither with the leftists nor the rightists, but with the people against those who rob and deceive them." Stanislav Shushkevich and Vyacheslav Kabish also ran, with the latter regarded as the clear favorite. Lukashenko won 45.1% of the vote while Kabish received 17.4%, Zyanon Pazhniak received 12.9% and Shushkevich, along with 2 other candidates, received less than 10% of votes. Lukashenko won the second round of the election on July 10 with 80.1% of the vote. The presidential inauguration was held in the halls of the Government House, on July 20, 1994, exactly 10 days after the election, during a special meeting of the Parliament, the Supreme Council. Shortly after his inauguration, he addressed the State Duma of the Russian Federation in Moscow proposing a new union of Slavic states, which would culminate in the creation of the Union of Russia and Belarus in 1999. In February 1995, Lukashenko announced his intention to hold a referendum. For the young Democratic Republic, this raised the controversial issue of the Russification of Belarus. Lukashenko said he would press ahead with the referendum regardless of opposition in the Supreme Council and threatened to suspend its activities if it did not agree to hold the referendum. On April 11, 1995, a vote was held in Parliament on calling a referendum on 4 issues proposed by Lukashenko: 1. Granting Russian the status of a state language, 2. Changing state symbols, 3. On economic integration with Russia, and 4. On giving the President the right to dissolve Parliament. The deputies rejected all issues, except for the issue of economic integration with Russia. It is unclear whether the President had legal power independently to call referendums, and if so, if they would be binding. Lukashenko stated that the referendum would be held despite the rejection by the deputies. In protest, 19 out of a total of 238 deputies of the Belarusian Popular Front led by Zyanon Pazhniak and the Belarusian Social Democratic Assembly led by Oleg Trusov began a hunger strike in the parliamentary meeting room and stayed there overnight on the night of 11-12 April. At night, under the pretext of a bomb threat, unidentified law enforcement personnel attacked and forcibly expelled the deputies. Lukashenko stated that he personally ordered the evacuation for security purposes. The Supreme Council accepted to hold the referendum on April 13 and in May 1995, Belarusian authorities held a referendum on the 4 issues. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly found neither the referendum nor the 1995 Belarusian parliamentary election, which took place in the same month, to have met conditions for free and fair elections. In the summer of 1996, deputies of the 199-member Belarusian parliament signed a petition to impeach Lukashenko on charges of violating the constitution. Shortly after that, a referendum was held on November 24, 1996, in which 4 questions were offered by Lukashenko and 3 offered by a group of parliament members. The questions ranged from social issues, abolition of the death penalty, to the national constitution. As a result of the referendum, the constitution that was amended by Lukashenko was accepted and the one amended by the Supreme Council was voided. On November 25, it was announced that 70.5% of voters, of an 84% turnout, had approved the amended constitution. The US and the EU, however, refused to accept the legitimacy of the referendum. After the referendum, Lukashenko convened a new parliamentary assembly from those members of the parliament who were loyal to him. After between 10 and 12 deputies withdrew their signature from the impeachment petition, only about 40 deputies of the old parliament were left and the Supreme Council was dismissed by Lukashenko. Nevertheless, international organizations and many Western countries do not recognize the current parliament given the way it was formed. Lukashenko was elected chairman of the Belarusian Olympic Committee in 1997. At the start of 1998, the Central Bank of Russia suspended trading in the Belarusian ruble, which led to a collapse in the value of the currency. Lukashenko responded by taking control of the National Bank of the Republic of Belarus, sacking the entire bank leadership and blaming the West for the free fall of the currency. Lukashenko blamed foreign governments for conspiring against him and, in April 1998, expelled ambassadors from the Drazhdy complex near Minsk and moved them to another building. The Drazhdy conflict caused an international outcry and resulted in a travel ban on Lukashenko from the EU and the US. Although the ambassadors eventually returned after the controversy died down, Lukashenko stepped up his rhetorical attacks against the West. He stated that Western governments were trying to undermine Belarus at all levels, even sports. During the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano, Japan. Upon the outbreak of the Kosovo War in 1999, Lukashenko suggested to Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic that Yugoslavia join the Union of Russia and Belarus. Second term. Under the original constitution, Lukashenko should have been up for re-election in 1999. However, the 1996 referendum extended Lukashenko's term for 2 additional years. In the September 9, 2001 election, Lukashenko faced Vladimir Goncharik and Sergei Gaidukevich. During the campaign, Lukashenko promised to raise the standards of farming, social benefits, and increase industrial output of Belarus. Lukashenko won in the first round with 75.65% of the vote. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said the process failed to meet international standards. Jane's Intelligence Digest surmised that the price of Russian support for Lukashenko ahead of the 2001 presidential election was the surrender of Minsk's control over its section of the Yamal-Europe gas pipeline. After the results were announced declaring Lukashenko the winner, Russia publicly welcomed Lukashenko's re-election. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, telephoned Lukashenko and offered a message of congratulations and support. Following the 2003 invasion of Iraq, American intelligence agencies reported that aides of Saddam Hussein managed to acquire Belarusian passports while in Syria, but that it was unlikely that Belarus would offer a safe haven for Saddam and his 2 sons. This action, along with arms deals with Iraq and Iran, prompted Western governments to take a tougher stance against Lukashenko. The US was particularly angered by the arms sales, and American political leaders increasingly began to refer to Belarus as Europe's last dictatorship. The EU was concerned for the security of its gas supplies from Russia, which are piped through Belarus, and took an active interest in Belarusian affairs. With the accession of Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, the EU's border with Belarus has grown to more than 1,000 kilometers. During a televised address to the nation on September 7, 2004, Lukashenko announced plans for a referendum to eliminate presidential term limits. This was held on October 17, 2004, the same day as parliamentary elections, and, according to official results, was approved by 79.42% of voters. Previously, Lukashenko had been limited to 2 terms and thus would have been constitutionally required to step down after the presidential elections in 2006. Opposition groups, the OSCE, the European Union, and the U.S. State Department stated that the vote fell short of international standards. Belarus grew economically under Lukashenko, but much of this growth was due to Russian crude oil, which was imported at below-market prices, refined, and sold to other European countries at a profit. Third term. After Lukashenko confirmed he was running for re-election in 2005, opposition groups began to seek a single candidate. On October 16, 2005, on the Day of Solidarity with Belarus, the political groups Zubr and Third Way Belarus encouraged all opposition parties to rally behind one candidate to oppose Lukashenko in the 2006 election. Their chosen candidate was Alexander Milenkevich. Lukashenko reacted by saying that anyone going to opposition protests would have their necks wrung as one might a duck. On March 19, 2006, exit polls showed Lukashenko winning a third term in a landslide, amid opposition reports of vote rigging and fear of violence. The Belarusian Republican Youth Union gave Lukashenko 84.2% and Milenkevich 3.1%. The Gallup organization noted that the Belarusian Republican Youth Union are government-controlled and released the exit poll results before noon on election day, even though voting stations did not close until 8 p.m. Belarusian authorities vowed to prevent any large-scale demonstrations following the election. Despite their efforts, the opposition had the largest number of demonstrators in years, with nightly protests in Minsk continuing for a number of days after the election. The largest protest occurred on election night. Reporters for the Associated Press estimated that approximately 10,000 people turned out. Election observers from the Russia-led Commonwealth of Independent States and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe differed on the Belarusian election. The OSCE declared on March 20, 2006 that the presidential election failed to meet OSCE commitments for democratic elections. Lukashenko permitted state authority to be used in a manner which did not allow citizens to freely and fairly express their will at the ballot box. A pattern of intimidation and the suppression of independent voices was evident throughout the campaign. The heads of all 25 EU countries declared that the election was fundamentally flawed. In contrast, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs declared, long before the elections, the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights had declared that they would be illegitimate, and it was pretty biased in its commentaries on their progress and results, thus playing an instigating role. Lukashenko later stated that he had rigged the election results, but against himself, in order to obtain a majority more typical of European countries. Although he had won 93.5% of the vote, he said, he had directed the government to announce a result of 86%. Some Russian nationalists, such as Dmitry Rogozin and the Movement Against Illegal Immigration, stated that they would like to see Lukashenko become president of Russia in 2008. Lukashenko responded that he would not run for the Russian presidency, but that if his health was still good, he might run for re-election in 2011. In September 2008, parliamentary elections were held. Lukashenko had allowed some opposition candidates to stand, though in the official results, opposition members failed to get any of the 110 available seats. OSCE observers described the vote as flawed, including several cases of deliberate falsification of results. Opposition members and supporters demonstrated in protest. According to the Nizhny Novgorod-based CIS election observation mission, the findings of which are often dismissed by the West, the elections in Belarus conformed to international standards. Lukashenko later commented that the opposition in Belarus was financed by foreign countries and was not needed. In April 2009, he held talks with Pope Benedict XVI in the Vatican, Lukashenko's first visit to Western Europe after a travel ban on him a decade earlier. Fourth term. Lukashenko was one of 10 candidates registered for the presidential election held in Belarus on December 19, 2010. Though originally envisaged for 2011, an earlier date was approved to ensure the maximum participation of citizens in the electoral campaign and to set most convenient time for the voters. The run-up to the campaign was marked by a series of Russian media attacks on Lukashenko. The Central Election Committee said that all 9 opposition figures were likely to get less than half the vote total that Lukashenko would get. Though opposition figures alleged intimidation and that dirty tricks were being played, the election was seen as comparatively open as a result of desire to improve relations with both Europe and the US. On election day, 2 presidential candidates were seriously beaten by police in different opposition rallies. On the night of the election, opposition protesters chanting out, "Long live Belarus," and other similar slogans attempted to storm the building of the government of Belarus, smashing windows and doors before riot police were able to push them back. The number of protesters was reported by major news media as being around or above 10,000 people. At least 7 of the opposition presidential candidates were arrested. Several of the opposition candidates, along with their supporters and members of the media, were arrested. Many were sent to prison, often on charges of organizing a mass disturbance. Examples include Andrei Sunikov, Alexander Otroskenkov, Ales Michalevic, Mykola Statkovic, and Uladzimir Neoklaiu. Sunikov's wife, journalist Irina Kalip, was put under house arrest. Yaroslav Raymanchuk's party leader, Anatoly Lebedko, was also arrested. The CEC said that Lukashenko won 79.65% of the vote with 90.65% of the electorate voting. The OSCE categorized the elections as flawed while the CIS mission observers praised them as free and transparent. However, the OSCE also stated that some improvements were made in the run-up to the election, including the candidates' use of television debates and ability to deliver their messages unhindered. Several European foreign ministers issued a joint statement calling the election and its aftermath an unfortunate step backwards in the development of democratic governance and respect for human rights in Belarus. Lukashenko's inauguration ceremony of January 22, 2011 was boycotted by EU ambassadors, and only 32 foreign diplomats attended. During this ceremony, Lukashenko defended the legitimacy of his re-election and vowed that Belarus would never have its own version of the 2004 Orange Revolution in Ukraine or Georgia's 2003 Rose Revolution. Effective January 31, 2011, the EU renewed a travel ban prohibiting Lukashenko and 156 of his associates from traveling to EU member countries. As a result of the crackdown on opposition supporters. Lukashenko was supportive of China's Belt and Road Initiative global infrastructure development strategy, and the inception in 2012 of the associated low-tax China-Belarus Industrial Park near Minsk National Airport planned to grow to 112 square kilometers by the 2060s. Fifth term. On October 11, 2015, Lukashenko was elected for his 5th term as the president of Belarus. Just over 3 weeks later, he was inaugurated in the Independence Palace in the presence of attendees such as former President of Ukraine Leonid Kuchma, Chairman of the Russian Communist Party Gennady Zhuganov and Belarusian biathlete Daria Domracheva. On mid-September 2017, Lukashenko oversaw the advancement of joint Russian and Belarusian military relations during the military drills that were part of the Zapad 2017 exercise. In August 2018, Lukashenko fired his Prime Minister Andrei Kobyakov and various other officials due to a corruption scandal. Sergei Rumaz was appointed to take his place as Prime Minister. In May 2017, Lukashenko signed a decree on the foundation of the Directorate of the 2019 European Games in Minsk. In April 2019, Lukashenko announced that the Games were on budget and on time, and eventually he opened the second edition of the event on June 21. Between 1–3 July 2019, he oversaw the country's celebrations of the 75th anniversary of the Minsk Offensive, which culminated in an evening military parade of the armed forces of Belarus on the last day, which is the country's Independence Day. In August 2019, Lukashenko met with former Kyrgyz President Kurmanbek Bakiyev, who has lived in exile in Minsk since 2010, in the Palace of Independence to mark Bakiyev's 70th birthday, which he had marked several days earlier. The meeting, which included the presentation of traditional flowers and symbolic gifts, angered the Kyrgyz Foreign Ministry, which stated that the meeting fundamentally does not meet the principles of friendship and cooperation between the two countries. In November 2019, Lukashenko visited the Austrian capital of Vienna on a state visit, which was his first in 3 years to an EU country. During the visit, he met with President Alexander Van der Bellen, Chancellor Brigitte Bierlein, and National Council President Wolfgang Sobotka. He also paid his respects at the Soviet War Memorial at the Schwarzenberg-Platz. During the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, he undertook 2 working visits to Russia, one of the few European leaders to undertake foreign visits during the pandemic. He also received Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán during his state visit to Minsk. Orbán called for an end to EU sanctions on Belarus during this visit. His first visit to Russia was to attend the rescheduled Moscow Victory Day parade on Red Square together with his son. 6th term. On August 9, 2020, according to the preliminary count, Lukashenko was re-elected for his 6th term as the President of Belarus. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo warned that the election was not free-fair. Mass protests erupted across Belarus following the 2020 Belarusian presidential election, which was marred by allegations of widespread electoral fraud. Subsequently, opposition presidential candidate Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya claimed she had received between 60% and 70% of the vote and formed a coordination council to facilitate the peaceful and orderly transfer of power in Belarus. On August 15, 2020, Lithuanian Foreign Minister Linas Linkevicius referred to Lukashenko as the former president of Belarus. It was reported that President Lukashenko's authorities asked Kremlin representatives about the possibility of Lukashenko escaping to Russia. Furthermore, it was reported that Russia admits that Lukashenko's resignation from the post of head of state is likely. On August 17, 2020, the members of the European Parliament issued a joint statement which stated that they do not recognize Alexander Lukashenko as the President of Belarus, considering him to be persona non grata in the European Union. On August 19, the member states of the European Union agreed to not recognize the results and issued a statement saying the August 9 elections were neither free nor fair, therefore we do not recognize the results. The governments of the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada have also refused to recognize the results. In an interview on August 22, Josep Borrell explicitly stated that the European Union does not recognize Lukashenko as the legitimate president of Belarus in the same manner that it does not recognize Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela. On August 23, 2020, footage emerged showing Lukashenko at the Independence Palace in Minsk. In the first 2 videos, he is seen walking near a helicopter, wearing a bulletproof vest and holding an assault rifle, and then walking around the palace grounds. In the latter footage, Lukashenko was heard to say "Leave me alone," and "There is no one left there, right?" His 15-year-old son, Nikolai, was seen with him dressed in military uniform and holding a gun. In a third video, he is seen surveying protesters from a helicopter and is heard saying how the rats ran away in an apparent reference to the protesters. In a fourth video, Lukashenko was seen removing the former flag of Belarus from a flower bed, waving at security personnel and in reference to protesters, saying "We will deal with them." On August 30, the Independence Palace became again a scene of protests. When questioned about the whereabouts of Alexander Lukashenko on this day, his publicity team released an undated photograph of him walking around the grounds of the Independence Palace holding a gun. On September 23, 2020, Lukashenko was formally inaugurated president for a sixth term in a ceremony at the Palace of Independence attended by an invited group of 700 guests. On November 27, 2020, Lukashenko announced that he would resign once Belarus' new constitution was adopted. In December, the Executive Board of the International Olympic Committee decided to exclude until further notice all members of the Belarusian Olympic Committee from all IOC events, specifically targeting Lukashenko, who was elected as its chairman in 1997. On April 17, 2021, Russia's FSB security service exposed an alleged military coup and assassination attempt of Lukashenko. Russia also stated that it prevented Lukashenko's murder. Two suspects, who were detained at Lukashenko's request, were Alexander Fedjita and Yuri Zinkovich. Both are critics of Lukashenko, with the latter being a dual American Belarusian citizen, despite Belarus not recognizing dual citizenship. On April 24, 2021, Lukashenko announced that he would sign a decree to amend emergency transfer of power. "I will sign a decree about how the power in Belarus will be set up. If the president is shot, the Security Council will get the power." Lukashenko is the head of the Security Council himself, however, his eldest son, Viktor Lukashenko, is regarded as its informal leader. Under current law, the Prime Minister assumes the presidential powers if the presidency becomes vacant, but Lukashenko said that the Prime Minister will only become the nominal leader and all decisions would be taken by the 20-person Security Council, by secret ballot. The President is yet to sign the decree, and it would also be unconstitutional as Article 89 states how emergency transition of power is set up. This move was seen to empower his son, to be in the perfect position to succeed him in the next elections, to also prevent the opposition gaining power and as insurance against a bad prime minister. It is to note that all Security Council members are Lukashenko's most loyal allies. On May 5, 2021, Belarusians in Germany filed a legal complaint against Lukashenko for state torture and crimes against humanity. If he enters Germany, he risks trial, or if convicted and enters Germany, faces punishment given by court. Lukashenko responded that Germany was not in a position to criticize him, referring to the German government as the heirs of fascism. At the same time, he said that he will not resign, a reversal from his statement in November, but said he will call early presidential elections if and only if the United States does so as well. On May 9, 2021, Lukashenko signed a presidential decree titled "On the Protection of Sovereignty and Constitutional Order." The contingency decree states that in the event that the president is unable to perform his duties, martial law will be immediately imposed and presidential power will be transferred to the Security Council, which is widely believed to be made up of strong allies of Lukashenko. It also states that it is the responsibility of the Security Council to organize new presidential elections. Despite clearly contradicting Article 89 of the Constitution, Belarusian authorities praised the decree and declared it fully complies with legislation and is constitutional. A deputy from the House of Representatives told state media, 1. The decree is very necessary and timely. It fully complies with the legislation and is aimed at strengthening the sovereignty, independence, and security of our citizens. Why? It's no secret that a hybrid war is now actually waged against Belarus. Moreover, we are at a point where an armed coup d'état was made. So when someone says, how is it possible? But look at post-Soviet countries, look at the Middle East, look at events all over the world. Presidents are assassinated and countries taken over. Yugoslavia was bombed in the center of Europe. Look at what happened in Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Georgia. All these so-called revolutions are illegal coups d'état, behind which there is always Western money and work of Western money and the work of special services. Naturally, we must strengthen our national security and remove these risks. This is exactly what the decree aims at. It aims at making sure that only Belarusians should decide the future of the country. Domestic policy. Lukashenko promotes himself as a man of the people. Lukashenko wanted to rebuild Belarus when he took office. The economy was in free fall due to declining industry and lack of demand for Belarusian goods. Lukashenko kept many industries under the control of the government. In 2001, he stated his intention to improve the social welfare of his citizens and to make Belarus powerful and prosperous. With the ascent to power of Lukashenko in 1994, the Russification policy of Russian imperial and Soviet era was renewed. Since the November 1996 referendum, Lukashenko has effectively held all governing power in the nation. Under the constitution, if the House of Representatives rejects his choice for Prime Minister twice, he has the right to dissolve it. His decrees have greater weight than ordinary legislation. He also has near absolute control over government spending. Parliament can only increase or decrease spending with his permission. However, the legislature is dominated by his supporters in any event, and there is no substantive opposition to presidential decisions. Indeed, every seat in the lower house has been held by pro-Lukashenko MPs for all but one term since 2004. He also appoints 8 members of the upper house, the Council of the Republic, as well as nearly all judges. Economy. Coronavirus. Political repression. Torture, sexual abuse and other forms of repression. Forced disappearances. Assassination plans on dissidents abroad. Allegations of state-sponsored hijacking. Foreign policy. Russia. Europe. United States. Middle East. Others. Public life. Controversial statements. Lukashenko has made several controversial statements during his presidency which have been regarded as anti-Semitic, homophobic and misogynistic. In 1995, Lukashenko made a remark in which he named Adolf Hitler as a role model for his presidential system in Belarus. The history of Germany is a copy of the history of Belarus. Germany was raised from ruins thanks to firm authority, and not everything connected with that well-known figure Hitler was bad. German order evolved over the centuries and attained its peak under Hitler. This corresponds with our understanding of a presidential republic and the role of a president in it. Lukashenko refused to take the quote back, but stated that the consequences of Hitler's leadership style and foreign policy had been bad. In October 2007, Lukashenko was accused of making anti-Semitic comments, addressing the miserable state of the city of Bobruisk on a live broadcast on state radio. He stated, "This is a Jewish city, and the Jews are not concerned for the place they live in. They have turned Bobruisk into a pigsty. Look at Israel, I was there and saw it myself. I call on Jews who have money to come back to Bobruisk." Members of the U.S. House of Representatives sent a letter to the Belarusian ambassador to the U.S., Mikhail Khvostov, addressing Lukashenko's comments with a strong request to retract them, and the comments also caused a negative reaction from Israel. Consequently, Pavel Yakubovich, editor of Belarus Today, was sent to Israel, and in a meeting with the Israel Foreign Ministry said that Lukashenko's comment was a mistake that was said jokingly, and does not represent his positions regarding the Jewish people, and that he was anything but anti-Semitic, and had been insulted by the mere accusation. The Belarusian ambassador to Israel, Igor Leshchenya, stated that the president had a kind attitude toward the Jewish people, and Sergei Ryhoravich, the press secretary at the Belarusian embassy in Tel Aviv, said parts of Lukashenko's comments had been mistranslated. On March 4, 2012, 2 days after EU leaders had called for new measures to pressure Lukashenko over alleged human rights abuses in Belarus at a summit in Brussels, Lukashenko provoked diplomatic rebuke from Germany after commenting that it was better to be a dictator than gay in response to Westerwelle having referred to him as Europe's last dictator during the meeting. After some of the initial candidates for the 2020 Belarusian presidential election were imprisoned, 3 women involved with the candidates, led by Svietlana Tsikhanouskaya, emerged as leading opposition against him and contested the results of the election. Lukashenko has spoken dismissively about the role of women in Belarusian society, saying that society is not mature enough to vote for a woman and, referring specifically to Tsikhanouskaya, that she just cooked a tasty cutlet, maybe fed the children, and the cutlet smelled nice, and now there's supposed to be a debate about some issues and that the burden of the presidency would cause her to collapse. Poor thing. In July 2021, Lukashenko was accused of making anti-Semitic comments during his Independence Day speech to the armed forces, saying the Jews managed to force the world to remember the Holocaust. The entire world grovels before them and gives in to them. They are afraid to say a single word out of place. And adding, we are tolerant and likable. We left things alone until it got to the point where others started attacking us and the memory of our efforts. The Israeli government said the comments were unacceptable and summoned the chargé d'affaires at the Belarus embassy in Israel. Public opinion. Independent polling is tightly restricted in Belarus. Surveys are monopolized by the government, which either does not publish its surveys or uses them for propagandistic purposes. According to a leaked internal poll, a third of the population had trust in Lukashenko. The last credible public poll in Belarus was a 2016 poll showing approximately 30% approval for Lukashenko. Lukashenko is referred to as Batska by his supporters. During the 2020-21 Belarusian protests, opponents of Lukashenko began to refer to him as Sasha 3% on the basis that they believed that he was only supported by 3% of the Belarusian population. The term has subsequently become a popular meme within the Belarusian opposition, appearing on T-shirts and posters. Lukashenko has also been referred to as Tarakanish by his opponents in reference to the poem The Monster Cockroach, in which a mustached cockroach inflicts a reign of terror on the other animals before being eaten by a sparrow. Accusations of corruption. A film produced by Nexta, an opposition group based in Poland, accuses Lukashenko of misappropriating EU funds on residences and automobiles. The film was uploaded to Telegram and YouTube, where it had over 6 million views. Lukashenko did not comment on the film directly, but on a factory visit in March 2021 claimed that opponents were creating a fake story to destabilize the country. Lukashenko states, "I want you to understand, I have been working as president for a quarter of a century, and if there were already some billions, as they say, or palaces, I would have already been torn to pieces from all sides." EU officials also dismissed the accusations as speculation. Personal life. Marriage and children. Lukashenko married Galina Jelnirovich, his high school sweetheart, in 1975. Later that year, his oldest son, Viktor, was born. Their second son, Dmitry, was born in 1980. Galina lives separately in a house in the village Shkla. Though they are still legally married, Galina Lukashenko has been estranged from her husband since shortly after he became president. In a 2014 interview, Lukashenko said that they had not lived together for 30 years and the only reason they had not divorced was that he did not want to traumatize his adult sons. Lukashenko has been seen on public occasions with various women. When asked about this in the same 2014 interview, he explained that he did not want to sit with an official with a sour face, preferring my son on one side, and a girl on the other. Lukashenko fathered a son, Nikolai, who was born in 2004. Though never confirmed by the government, it is widely believed that the child's mother is Irina Abelskaya. The two had an extramarital affair when she was Lukashenko's personal doctor. There has never been any public statement about who Nikolai's mother is. Nikolai was raised solely by his father. It has been reported by Western observers and media that Nikolai, nicknamed Kolya, is being groomed as Lukashenko's successor. According to Belarusian state media, these speculations were dismissed by Lukashenko, who also denied that he would remain in office for a further 30 years, the time Nikolai will become eligible to stand for election and succeed him. Lukashenko has a pet dog, a Spitz named Umka. Sports. Lukashenko used to play football, but stopped playing during his presidency. His two elder sons also play ice hockey, sometimes alongside their father. Lukashenko started training in cross-country running as a child, and in the 2000s still competed at the national level. He is a keen skier and ice hockey forward. In an interview he said that he plays ice hockey 3 times a week. He has established the Belarus president's team, an amateur team which he sometimes plays for. Numerous ice rinks intended to enable competitive ice hockey games to be played, have been built all over Belarus at Lukashenko's behest. Lukashenko was instrumental in getting the 2014 IIHF World Championship in ice hockey to be hosted by Belarus, which was considered controversial due to Lukashenko's repressive regime. Belarus was supposed to host the 2021 IIHF World Championship in May 2021, but that was cancelled after international condemnation and threats by sponsors to withdraw. Religion and beliefs. Lukashenko describes himself as an orthodox atheist, and has said that he believes that the president should be a conservative person and avoid using modern electronic technology such as a tablet or smartphone. He used to play the bayan, a musical instrument similar to an accordion.